You are listening to Bedtime Dreamy Tales. Share and subscribe our channel. Story title: The Little Mermaid. Part 1: The Deep Blue Sea. Far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep indeed that no cable could fathom it. Many church steeples, piled one upon another, would not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. This vast expanse of water was the realm of the Sea King. His underwater kingdom was a place of wonder and beauty, filled with the most singular flowers and plants. These plants were so pliant that the slightest movement of the water caused them to stir as if they were alive. Fishes, both large and small, glided between the branches just as birds fly among the trees on land. In the deepest spot of all stood the Sea King's castle. Its walls were built of coral and the long Gothic windows were made of the clearest amber. The roof was formed of shells that opened and closed as the water flowed over them. Each shell contained a glittering pearl that would have been fit for the diadem of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother managed his household. She was a wise woman, proud of her high birth, and wore 12 oysters on her tail to signify her noble status. Other mermaids of high rank were only allowed to wear 6. The underwater kingdom was far from being a desolate place of bare yellow sand. Instead, it was a vibrant, living world full of beauty and mystery. The Sea King's castle was surrounded by a beautiful garden where bright red and dark blue flowers grew and blossoms that looked like flames of fire. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was the finest sand, blue as the flame of burning sulfur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if it were surrounded by the air from above, through which the blue sky shone instead of the dark depths of the sea. The Sea King had 6 beautiful daughters, each more lovely than the last. The youngest of them all was the prettiest. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. However, like all her sisters, she had no feet. Her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long, they played in the great halls of the castle or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in just as swallows fly into our houses when we open the windows. The fish swam up to the princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. Outside the castle, there was a beautiful garden. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One princess arranged her flower bed into the form of a whale. Another made hers like the figure of a little mermaid. The youngest princess's garden was round like the sun and contained flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful. While her sisters delighted in the wonderful things they obtained from shipwrecks, she cared for nothing but her pretty red flowers and a beautiful marble statue of a handsome boy. This statue had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck, and she had planted a rose-colored weeping willow beside it. It grew splendidly, and soon its fresh branches hung over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The young princess loved to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew about ships, towns, people, and animals. It seemed most wonderful and beautiful to her to hear that the flowers of the land had fragrance and that the trees of the forest were green. She was amazed to learn that the birds could sing so sweetly. Her grandmother called the little birds fishes, or she would not have understood her, for she had never seen birds. The Little Mermaid's greatest desire was to visit the world above the sea. Her grandmother had told her that when she reached her 15th year, she would have permission to rise up out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships sailed by. She would be able to see both forests and towns. The young princess eagerly awaited her turn. She often stood by the open window at night, looking up through the dark blue water and watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming over her head or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. As soon as the eldest princess turned 15, she was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to talk about. The most beautiful, she said, was to lie in the moonlight on a sandbank near the coast and gaze on a large town nearby where the lights twinkled like hundreds of stars. She described the sounds of music, the noise of carriages, and the voices of human beings. She longed for these wonderful things more than ever because she could not go near them. The youngest sister listened eagerly to all these descriptions, and afterwards, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city with all its bustle and noise. She even fancied she could hear the sound of the church bells down in the depths of the sea. In the following year, the second sister turned 15 and received permission to rise to the surface. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold, while violet and rose-colored clouds floated over her. A large flock of wild swans flew towards the setting sun, looking like a long white veil across the sea. She swam towards the sun, but it sank into the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds and the sea. The third sister was the boldest of them all. When her turn came, she swam up a broad river that emptied into the sea. On the banks, she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines, palaces, and castles peeping out from amid the proud trees of the forest. She heard the birds singing, and the sun's rays were so powerful that she often had to dive under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek, she found a whole troop of little human children playing in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in fright. Then a little black animal came to the water. It was a dog, but she did not know that, for she had never seen one. The animal barked at her so terribly that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. However, she never forgot the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty little children who could swim in the water, although they had no fishtails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the middle of the sea, but said it was quite as beautiful there as near the land. She could see for miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She saw ships at a great distance, which looked like seagulls. Dolphins sported in the waves, and great whales spouted water from their nostrils until it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so she saw a different world. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs floated about, each like a pearl, but larger and loftier than the churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes and glittered like diamonds. She sat upon one of the largest icebergs and let the wind play with her long hair. She noticed that all the ships sailed rapidly by, steering as far away from the iceberg as possible. Towards evening, dark clouds covered the sky, the thunder rolled and the lightning flashed. The red light glowed on the icebergs as they rocked and tossed on the heaving sea. The ship's sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while the Little Mermaid sat calmly on the floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. When the sisters first had permission to rise to the surface, they were delighted with the new and beautiful sights they saw. However, as grown-up girls, they could go whenever they pleased and had become indifferent about it. They wished themselves back in the water and, after a month, said it was much more beautiful down below and pleasanter to be at home. Yet, often in the evening hours, the five sisters would twine their arms around each other and rise to the surface in a row. They had more beautiful voices than any human being could have, and before the approach of a storm, or when they expected a ship would be lost, they swam before the vessel and sang sweetly of the delights to be found in the depths of the sea. They begged the sailors not to fear if they sank to the bottom. However, the sailors could not understand the song. They took it for the howling of the storm. These things were never beautiful for them. If the ship sank, the men drowned, and their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose, arm in arm, through the water in this way, the youngest sister would stand alone, looking after them, ready to cry, except that mermaids have no tears and therefore suffer more. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," she said, "I know that I shall love the world up there and all the people who live in it." At last, she reached her 15th year. "Well, now you are grown up," said her grandmother, "so you must let me adorn you like your other sisters." She placed a wreath of white lilies in her hair, and every flower leaf was half a pearl. The old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better, but she could not help herself. So she said, "Farewell," and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set as she raised her head above the waves. The clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm and the air mild and fresh. If you like this story, please give this video a like. For more stories, go to bedtimedreamytales.com. See you in the next story.